Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Mullen, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Libraries of the Future, Evolving Workflows, Systems, and Spaces to Better Serve Users, sponsored by ProQuest. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. Along the left-hand side, you will also see a Q&A panel that you can use to submit questions or comments. We'll spend some time responding to your questions during the program, so please feel free to submit them throughout. And finally, please note that today's program will be recorded and all registrants will receive follow-up instructions on accessing the archived version. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. Jeffrey Daniels earned a master's in Library and Information Science from Wayne State University and is currently Head of Knowledge Access and Research Management Services at Grand Valley State University Libraries. Jeffrey has been with GVSU for 17 years, holding a number of positions. Jeffrey has written and presented on a variety of topics, including web-scale discovery, electronic resource management, and technical services workflows. Each day it's important to try to grow a little, learn a little, and play a little. Jeffrey likes to work hard without taking the work itself too seriously, but he is passionate about connecting patrons with the information they're looking for, removing barriers to make the research process as seamless as possible. Kathryn Harnish joined ProQuest Workflow Solutions as the Director of Product Management for the Intota Library Services Platform in the middle of 2014. In this role, Kathryn leads the effort within ProQuest to reimagine the next generation of library systems, work influenced by a long history of product management responsibility for integrated library systems at Endeavor, Exlibris, and most recently, OCLC. Kathryn holds an MLS from the University of Pittsburgh and an MBA from Columbia Southern University. When she's not helping libraries implement systems that bridge current and future needs, she's most likely in her barn milking goats. With that, I'd like to turn things over to Jeffrey Daniels. Take it away, Jeff.
Thank you, Laura. As she mentioned, my name is Jeff Daniels. I'm with Grand Valley State Universities. I am the Head of Knowledge Access and Resource Management Services. Whenever I speak, I like to give a little bit of information about GVSU to put things in some context. Grand Valley State University is a public liberal arts university in western Michigan with between 24 and 25,000 students. Those of you familiar with Michigan, we're about a 20-minute drive west of Grand Rapids and a 20-minute drive east of Lake Michigan. So we're in a perfectly central location there. Our annual budget for materials and supporting resources are $4.7 million. And what do I mean by that is not only the resources that the patrons here use, but also things like Intota, Summon, our ILS that we use to access these resources. The library has about 70 staff members in 3 different locations, and we have around 1.5 million plus in terms of collection. GVSU Libraries won the 2012 ACRL Excellence in Academic Libraries Award. Now, when Michelle Dakota from ProQuest and I got to talking about this presentation, she asked me what I thought about the future of libraries. And to me, the future of libraries is all about the patron. Now, all about the patron, that is not very groundbreaking. That's not very new. Why should you listen to anything that I have to say about this? Well, first, I'm one of only 2 speakers today, so you don't really have a lot of choice unless you want to come back in another 20 minutes and just pick up on what Kathryn has to say. But also, my mom always said I had a trustworthy face. So there's that. Now, I know my bio says I've been with Grand Valley for 17 years, Actually, this slide says 20 because I included my time as a student worker here at the libraries. And why I think that's important, I like to steal the sports metaphor. I've hit for the cycle at Grand Valley. I was a student worker at the libraries, and then after I graduated, after a brief stint at Gale Signage, I came back as a staff member, an hourly staff member here at Grand Valley. After a few years of that, I was moved into a new role as administrative professional here at Grand Valley, and then most recently, for the most recent 5 years, I've been a faculty member here at Grand Valley. So I've worked at all levels of the library, and what I've seen is when Grand Valley is most successful, it's when our focus and drive is all about the patron. Now, the title of my team, Knowledge Access and Resource Management Services. I get a lot of jokes about that. It's a very long title. My business cards look ridiculous. But a few years ago, we did a complete overhaul of what was then the Technical Services and Electronic Resource Management team. Those of you who work in technical services, or you all have a technical services team, you have names like cataloging, acquisitions, periodicals, and those names are all about the task. And what my associate dean, Carlos Rodriguez, and I wanted to do was refocus the team, refocus our energy, and take it away from the task. Why do we catalog things? Why do we make them findable? Why do we buy them at all? And it's also the patron can access that knowledge. So with that new title, it really helps us day to day refocus what we're doing back to the patron. Now, I mentioned the ACRL award. GVSU has been receiving a lot of attention for our new building. And I am going to talk about the new building today. Library space is very important. But that building opened in 2013. We won that award in 2012, and we're very proud that that award demonstrated the staff's commitment to the students, faculty, and staff here at Grand Valley. Let's talk about that library. Marietta McHugh Library and Learning and Information Commons was opened in July of 2013, and we have since been certified as LEED Platinum. We're very proud of that. The $65 million project was built with a combination of private and university funding. We're also very proud of the fact that not a single penny of tuition was used in this project. The building was designed by SHW Group out of Detroit, Michigan, and was constructed by Pioneer Construction out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. The building itself is 5 floors, and it's about 154,000 square feet. The main tenets we used when designing this building were to align the library with the students' preferred environments, give them the tools to manage their own learning, and inspire and engage them. Today I'm going to focus a little bit on how GVSU is demonstrating its dedication to the patron through this building, through its policies, and through its programs. I talked a little bit about preferred environments. In this new building, we are actually pretty proud of the fact that we have 30 different types of chairs. And you'll see a little bit of the examples here in some of these photographs. These alcoves on the left that look like all-around couches are actually very comfortable and the first seats every day to go. But what we tell the patrons is if you're uncomfortable where you're seated physically, just move. You're going to find someplace that is a little more to your liking. Keeping up with the theme of preferred environments, we have a really open concept, and it's open and then students first, students helping students. In this top photograph, you'll see our main atrium lobby, and that's our service desk. It's not the traditional oak, we're on one side, you're on the other. I've got my hair in a bun and I'm going to shush you. We've got students right out there. We've got that pod design. It's really encouraged to share. You can even see one of the computers is turned around to work with the patrons. You'll also notice a lack of signs. We really wanted the building not to be bossy, for lack of a better phrase. That lower picture, you'll see some of our outdoor spaces. This is the green roof on the 4th floor of the library. Now, those of you, again, familiar with Michigan, you would not have wanted to go out there last month, but it is starting to warm up, and it's actually a beautiful place to watch the sunset. This is a photograph. It's actually a tweet that we captured of the atrium level, looking down on the atrium level. And I don't know if you can read it, but the tweet says, "How is this even a library? #lovely, #GVSU." The students have really claimed this part of the building, and they've actually started affectionately referring to it as the living room of campus. That made us really, really happy. We were concerned, obviously, whenever you build a new space or a new building, you wonder whether or not the students are going to come. In the fall of 2014, we averaged over 4,800 visitors a day. So we also wanted to let the students manage their own learning. On the left, you'll see one of our 19 study rooms, and they're reservable. There's that little device by the door where they can come up and they can reserve the study room, but you can also reserve that online through your phone, any place where you have an internet connection. Then on the right, you'll see one of our more traditional reading rooms, and yes, that's a 21-foot fireplace along the right side of that door, of that wall. Two quick stories about letting the students manage their own learning space. I am a little embarrassed to admit how far up the food chain we had to go at the university, but I can say the controls for that fireplace are unlocked, and the patrons that are in that room are allowed to turn on the fireplace, turn it up, turn it down, however they want. Also, I remember a meeting early on where we were talking with our head of operations and user services, and he was lamenting the fact that his staff was spending upwards of 2 hours every evening restaging all the furniture to our original stage design. And we decided as a library administrative group to no longer do that. If the students are moving the furniture, they moved it for a reason. If they want to move it again, they'll move it again. So now at the end of the day, they just move things out of the fire lane, and we only do a complete reset at the start of every semester. Here are two more of the more popular features at the library. On the left, you'll see some digital signage. And in the white area, if you can see, across the top there, those 4 green bars shows how many computers are available and open on each floor. The middle bar shows the reserve status of our reserve rooms, whether or not you can get into one of those right now. And then the bottom area is actually, you can switch it from floor to floor, and these digital displays are on each floor. It's a heat map of how busy the building is. So at a glance, when you're coming in, you can determine where it's going to be best for you to study. Then on the right, you'll see a picture of some of our, actually, these are the very most popular thing in the library. It's these movable whiteboards. They're all on wheels, and we have around 60 of them. And what the students do is they make study rooms on the fly. Depending on the size of the group, they'll pull a couple of those together, and they'll make their own study room and use them to take notes. They're managing their own learning experience. We also wanted to energize and engage the students. Now, it might be a little bit of a sin for me to say this as a tech services librarian, but I don't think open stacks are all that energizing. The Marietta McHugh Library does have open stacks on 3 floors. We've got the capacity for 50,000 books on each floor, but we also put in an ASRS, an automated retrieval storage system, and you see a picture of that there on the right. This can hold up to 600,000 volumes. So what we're going to do is we're going to be using Intota assessment to pull information each year, and items that circulate will remain on the open stacks. Items that do not will move to the vault. And what we're hoping is that over the next 3 to 5 years, that 3-floor collection will really become the living, breathing, usable day-to-day collection at Grand Valley. And just to put things a little bit in perspective, if we had done all open shelving to get to this capacity, our 5-story building would need to be 17 stories. So that extra space that we've got from the ASRS has allowed us to do a few other things to energize the students. We have a technology showcase, which you can see a picture of here, that's actually light projected onto the window. It's really neat. They've got a lot of different patterns. My favorite is the fish tank. And what we have in there is we have a makerspace. We have Google Glass. We have engineering technologies. We have 3D printers. Anything that is a new technology that could potentially be used in education, we get one. The staff that works in that room, which is primarily students, learns how to use it, and then it's open to our patrons, our faculty, our students, to come in and play with. It's some really neat toys. This is a picture of our learning alcove. This is a big screen TV that's in one of the higher traffic areas of the library, and we have constant video going on that. Grand Valley created video, but also stuff like TED Talks and some more of the educational things that are on YouTube. We call it serendipitous learning. I call it sneaky learning. If you got a cup of coffee and you're waiting for a friend, there's just these little 5-minute videos where you might accidentally learn something. We also have an exhibition space that I don't have a picture of here today, but we do any exhibit. The only rule for the exhibits is they have to be open to the students. And we've had everything from a very successful scholarly communications display explaining the cost of information and why open access is important to a moving, the Kinder Transport had their exhibit come to the Grand Valley, and it was in our space for quite some time. Now, switching gears a little bit to focusing on the patron through policies. This cartoon is by Scott Hilburn, and I found it at his site at the Argyle Sweater. And the policy I want to talk about is my own policy for tech services. If I can pay someone else to do the work, I will. Now, here is where I put a plug-in for myself. I don't have tenure yet at Grand Valley, and it is a faculty line, so I do have an article, Doing More with Less, about outsourcing that I co-wrote with one of my colleagues. And if you want to go to our institutional repository and just spend the rest of this webinar downloading that over and over, I'd really appreciate that. But I've got two quick examples of how we use outsourcing to free up staff space to then give back more to the patrons. Vendor-provided MARC records. The example I'm going to use here is very extreme, but I think it's telling. We have over 60,000 full-text journals at Grand Valley State University. When I first came back as a staff member, I was tasked with cataloging e-journals, so to speak. And I started by putting a manual 856 link for every paper journal we had in ABI Inform Complete at the time, and then copy cataloging every e-journal that we didn't have. It became clear very, very quickly that that was not a tenable solution. And that's when we first came to Serial Solutions. At the time, they were just offering an HTML A to Z list, but soon after we started buying MARC records from them. So if you follow this example through, we've got 60,000 full-text e-journals. My staff tells me if they were going to copy catalog and test the link, it's going to take them about 5 minutes to handle each of the titles in-house. If they worked on that straight for 7 hours, they could get 84 records done in a day. So I would need almost 3 years to get the initial load of our e-journals in. Staying on that same example, for the past 2.5 years, we've been averaging between 7,000 to 10,000 updates a month. Now, the updates come in 3 files. They've got a batch of new, a batch of changes, and a batch of deletes. I have one staff member doing this, and it takes her 4 hours once a month. Now, again, if we were to do this manually, we would say about 3 minutes to update these records by hand, because you're just updating them. So we would need 21,000 minutes of work, or 7 hours per day, 50 work days, or 10 weeks. So I would need 2.5 months to update 1 month. Obviously, it's not going to work. So if I wanted to get that done in the same 4 hours, you can follow the math through again. I would need 87.5 staff members to get that done in the same 4 hours as opposed to 1. So it's a really extreme example of where paying someone else to do the work is paying off for Grand Valley. So this doesn't even count the larger project that you really pay Serial Solutions for, of gathering the information of what's in these resources, these big aggregated packages, staying on top of date changes, things like that. It's an extreme example, but these add up. We keep a MARC record list, an Excel file of all the places we get MARC records from vendors, and we get MARC records from 55 different vendors and locations. There's just no way you could do that. So it's become so important for us to have vendor-provided MARC records. There's a popular streaming video subscription package that we wanted for quite a few years, and we told them no 3 years in a row till they could provide MARC records and updates to those MARC records. Now, there's an exception to every rule. We did get a small ebook reference collection, and we did pay for the MARC records because we couldn't negotiate for them to be free, and they ended up being so bad that we didn't use them. We ended up copy cataloging them ourselves. So I'm not just saying outsource everything, but when it makes sense, it's the best way to save time. Another example is foreign language cataloging. Some exciting changes to GVSU's curriculum over the past few years have resulted in an increase in Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, Russian. Our book jobber that we get these titles from doesn't handle pre-processing, so we had been cataloging them in staff. Traditionally, my staff is very comfortable reading and copy cataloging the Romantic languages, but not the 4 that I mentioned above. So we've been working with Backstage Library Works. They do a mix of copy cataloging and original cataloging, and we do end up paying $20 to $25 a book. That is a huge commitment of money, and it is a new line item that we've committed to having this go forward. But what we had been doing is guessing. We had been using Google Translator on titles. Half of the books weren't even coming with an ISBN. So even though we ship these books out now and pay to have them cataloged, it's quicker than what we were doing, which was putting them on a shelf and waiting till one of the professors in one of those departments had time to come over and translate for us. So what does this mean? How does this focus on the patron? Well, with outsourcing these types of things, I've been able to keep my staff very, very small. When our authorities clerk retired, we were able to take that line and turn it into a scholarly communications support position. When our traditional cataloger left the university for another job, we were able to turn that position into a web services librarian position. So we're focusing on the patron by making sure that all of our staff lines are paying off in the best way possible. Another policy is our document delivery policies. First, we have desktop delivery. We'll either get it for you in traditional interlibrary loans, that's everybody knows how that works, but even if it's in one of the databases we own, or even if it's in a book on our shelves or in our ASRS, we will get that for you, we will scan it in, and we will email it to you. And then we also have a purchase instead of borrow policy. As long as a book was published or produced in the last 3 years, in English, cost less than $100, and we can get it rushed, when we get a request for a borrow, we just buy it. We don't borrow it. With rush shipping, turns out we get it quicker, and our thinking on this was really that, we all have books on the shelves that have never circulated. So why not buy a book that we know is going to get at least one use? Demand-driven access is a program where we're focusing on the patron. Grand Valley is actually in our 5th year of our DDA program. We work with YBP, and we provide eBrary and EBO. Currently, we have over 500,000 books available with our DDA program. Our profile, when we started 5 years ago, we threw it wide open. I think we actually selected everything EBL had but Springer, because at the time, we had every book from Springer that they were putting out as an ebook. So we've started to tweak things a little bit. We're getting rid of some of the older titles, and we started to put some price caps on. If you look at the last 2 fiscal years that I have over here on the right, last fiscal year, we committed almost $300,000 to this program. But you see we're getting a lot of use out of that. And I particularly enjoy the difference. We had over 13,000 short-term loans, but that was only 884 triggered purchases. So I really think you can start to see the value you're getting from a DDA program. And actually, early next week, I have my startup webinar with Canopy, which is a streaming video service. So we're going to go DDA with them as well. Now, I don't think that I could do a Library of the Future or Futures of Libraries without library as publisher. I think it's very, very important, and it's another program we need to talk about. Scholarly communications. We use Digital Common from bPress, and in the era of big packages, I really think the unique content that represents your university is going to be your special collections as well as the scholarly material that's produced by your faculty and staff. So we've really dedicated ourselves to this. We have a team of 3 now, one of those coming from the line I mentioned before that was on my team, and we currently publish over 20 journals. The most downloaded article was in the journal Online Readings in Psychology and Culture, and it alone had over 93,000 downloads. And you see that journal had 370,000 downloads. The most downloaded open education resource, online textbooks that our faculty have delivered, has over 73,000 downloads, for all of the open education resources, with the most popular one being downloaded over 20,000 times itself. The knowledge market is something we've been getting a lot of press for at Grand Valley State University. This is another program we started. We reached out to other entities on campus, and we provide research consulting, writing consulting, speech consulting. The concept being wherever you're at and in your assignment, you can come to the library and get help. Now, we started this in September in 2013 just in the new building, but we've since expanded it to our other 2 library locations. The hours are all in the evening, and it's all peer-to-peer consulting. All the consultants from all 3 areas are students at Grand Valley State University. If you just look at the academic year 2013-14, you'll see some numbers. The one I'm most impressed with is that last number. We've reached students in 53 different departments with our research consultations. Now, at the end of every consultation, and we've had almost 1,400, we ask the students these 3 questions. Were you comfortable working with the consultant? Do you believe today's consultation helpful with your research? And are you more confident with your ability to complete your research assignment successfully after working with the consultant? And you'll see we've got 98 or right about 98% at very comfortable, somewhat comfortable, really, really positive results on this program. So that is just a few examples of how Grand Valley libraries are focusing on the patron, which I believe is the future, with our building spaces, our policies, and our programs. I've got my email address up here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that we don't get to today. Feel free to reach out to me directly. And on the right, I never know what to put on the last slide, so this is an adorable picture of my Greyhound Betty, and she told me she really wants you to stick around and listen to what Kathryn has to say next. Thank you. Go ahead, Kathryn.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. And greetings to the audience out there from snowy northern Maine this afternoon. I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to visit Grand Valley State late last summer. And one of the words that Jeff used to characterize what they're hoping to do and what I think they've been very successful in doing with their patrons is energizing them. And I certainly came away from my visit feeling very energized in my role, looking at leading the development efforts and leading the planning efforts around ProQuest Next Generation Library System. I continually return to my pictures of that visit. I took lots of pictures of the library and really think about that experience at Grand Valley as I think about designing the library system of the future. My experience there was certainly one where I got a very clear sense of how innovative thinking about space and services has fundamentally changed, and I would actually use the word disrupted users' interactions with the library. So I want to frame my talk today in the context of disruptive innovation, which I really think is what's happening at Grand Valley State. Disruptive innovation is change that fundamentally alters how a market or an ecosystem functions. And I can't think of a better, broader example of disruptive innovation than the iPhone. When the iPhone was first introduced, it changed the value proposition for the cell phone market because it wasn't just a cell phone anymore. It was the first truly functional handheld computer. Apple understood that by introducing data processing capabilities to a voice-based service, they could change the storyline. They could revolutionize the user's experience with cellular technology. Sure, the iPhone still provides voice services. It has to. It's one of those things that we expect a cell phone to do. But the disruption, the transformation, comes in how Apple conceived of the way that people could work and play using this same device and expanding the role that that device plays. If ever there was a landscape ready for disruptive innovation, I think it's today's library space. I'm not going to linger here because you know the issues better than I do. We have a somewhat apocalyptic convergence, and for that phrasing, I thank the Education Advisory Board for the colorful language. We have unsustainable costs and declining usage coming together on one side, combined with the emergence of new alternatives, services like Google that are sort of supplanting the traditional role of the library, and some changing patron demands. They're used to being on the web. They're digital natives that have a very different expectation of the kinds of services that they might receive from the library moving forward. In this environment, many of you are considering next-generation library systems, systems that have been conceived of from a very functional or process-oriented standpoint. And given my background, having worked on a number of systems before, I can tell you that the way that I've approached designing ILS systems in the past is to think about, okay, we have to have an ILS module because we have to process orders and invoices and receipts. We have to have a cataloging module because we have to ingest data and manage bibliographic and item records. We have to build a circulation module because we need to distribute items and get them back. So we're very focused on process and on the components of these processes. In these traditional ILS environments, the focus is really on moving items around, whether it's in acquisitions or cataloging or circulation. really we're focused on inventory management. And libraries are about more than just transactions, more than just moving resources around, more than just inventory management. So let's press pause for a moment and think about what this means. If libraries are about more, what else do we value? What do our users value about the library? As the daughter of a librarian and someone who has had the privilege of working in and with libraries over the past 20 years, I really feel strongly that we are about more. I believe that librarians bring trust and access and authority to the table. We facilitate discovery, help people, and make connections. And as a result, we're valued for our unique role in knowledge, learning, and intellectual freedom. Now, as I went through that list of what users value, you'll notice that that list doesn't include words like invoice or deduplication or fines and fees. Although, as I'll discuss in a moment, we still need those things to support our larger objectives. It's just not where we start thinking about ourselves as an industry and as an organization that provides services to users. So if it's not about acquisitions and cataloging and circulation, how do we think about the library from a systems context, in a systems world? I would propose that when you boil everything down that libraries are about, you're left with three things. You're left with resources and people and the connections between them. And that's really at the heart of the way that we're approaching Intota. So if we begin with a model that's based on, a conceptual model that's based on inventory management that starts with those processes I mentioned earlier, I believe that we're going to fall far short of the promise that we're made to fulfill, fall short of this transformative moment for libraries, and not take the opportunity to sort of move to the future. We need a new approach to translating what we do in our systems, one that focuses on people and not process. So as a result, we've made a big investment at the outset in a conceptual modeling activity right from the start of Intota. We approached how we would describe what the system should do by modeling your real-world objectives and goals and the way that you and your users think about them in a knowledge economy that is rapidly transforming how we work. We need to build a system that supports your objectives rather than one you have to work around. And I know many of you in your current systems are probably struggling with working around current functional workflows, current sort of linear and constrained approaches to processes that really don't mesh well with the way that libraries are working today with the kinds of emerging workflows, emerging formats, and business models that you're trying to tackle. So the Intota conceptual model. At the very highest level, the conceptual model, as I said, is about resources or collections of resources and people or collections of people and the relationships between them. For the purposes of this illustration, I've also added organizations to the model, although arguably organizations are just collections of people. The services that we build in our next generation library system in Intota then stem from the relationships that are expressed in this model between resources and other resources, between people and other people, and between resources and people. Relationships between resources and people can be discovery relationships, delivery connections, or changing the view from patron to staff, a selection relationship. Anytime that a person is acting upon, discovering, receiving, accessing, choosing a resource, that's a relationship between the resource and the person. Acquisition is, again, a relationship that's between a resource and an organization. And authentication and negotiation are services between a person and an organization. The organization authenticates a user, validates their relationship to the organization, and then negotiates specific terms or access rights to the resources that the organization stewards. As we build services that represent the dynamics of these relationships, we create artifacts. So we create a usage artifact that captures exactly what's happening between a resource and a person. And we also capture transaction artifacts, outputs of those relationship services, things like price and status and things like that if you're thinking about it from an acquisition standpoint. But really what's driving the activity in this model, what's driving the way that we approach Intota development is not processes. They're a part of this model, but they aren't the central elements. The central elements are resources, people, and the processes are captured in the relationships between them. So a very different way of looking at how a system is built and what the important components in the system are. So you may be saying, okay, Kathryn, what does that mean in practice? And I'd like to talk through two examples that help to illustrate this. The first is a really common scenario in all libraries. A researcher finds and wants to request a resource of interest that isn't available in the local collection. Before Intota, that user would kick off a number of steps. First, they fill out an online request form, selecting the delivery method he or she thinks is best. And believe me, we don't make that easy. We impose, in a lot of cases, our library lingo. Is it a consortial loan? Is it an interlibrary loan? Is it available on the shelf? Is it available electronically? We make that selection process really tough for users to figure out what the best method for getting the resource is. They happen in this example to choose interlibrary loan as the method for getting the item. And when the request comes to the staff person in interlibrary loan, they look at that request and they realize that the researcher needs the resource by the end of the week. And in most cases, interlibrary loan might not be the best method for getting that resource to the user. So at that point, the ILL staff person, wanting to be helpful, sends an email to the acquisitions department. Their colleague in acquisitions then has to go search for the item, perhaps in Amazon because they offer very rapid delivery, and they place the order. At that point, he or she then has to go find the metadata to represent that thing that's been ordered and enter that into a corresponding order record in the ILS. So there are obviously more steps in this process, but I think that you get the picture that this is an incredibly process-oriented, highly mediated, and time-consuming activity for both the patron and the staff members. We certainly aren't providing the highest level of service and the most efficient mechanism of delivery in this context. If we think about this from a conceptual model approach, same exact situation, wanting to support a researcher's request for an item. From the discovery interface, a patron can initiate a get it for me request. Intota is going to receive that request and consider it based on user and resource characteristics. So Intota is going to look at things like, when does the patron need it by, patron characteristic? What are the patron's format preferences? What's the cost to deliver this resource in a variety of different methods? That's a resource characteristic. What's the patron's preferred pickup location? Maybe they live close to another library but work or come to school 1 day a week at another institution. So where would you prefer to pick that up? We also look at the needed by date. So the needed by date is going to automatically rule out interlibrary loan as a delivery mechanism. We don't need any human intervention to determine that based on some rules that we set up. While the resource is available electronically, we know that because Intota is going to capture both print and electronic availability. Our faculty patron in this case prefers print. Maybe it's somebody from the humanities, they really have a preference for working with the print resource rather than the electronic resource, and we're going to try and meet that need. Intota uses its library-defined rules, so the library configures a set of rules that help to determine the best way of getting this, and in this case we determined that the resource should be ordered from Amazon. And since the resource costs less than $30, Intota can automatically place the order in Amazon and create an invoice record for it in acquisitions. We don't have to create an order record anymore because we're actually don't need that placeholder. We've already paid at the point of purchase in Amazon for this resource. So we just need the transaction element that I talked about before, the output of that process to capture the invoice information. So a much more streamlined process, and in this case, the action of clicking on the Get It For Me button way back at the beginning can automatically trigger that whole stream of processes, which can be automated because we know a lot more about the resource and about the patron and can connect the two of them together more efficiently and more effectively. So again, the patron gets connected to the resource better and faster. The requesting process is dramatically simplified for the user. We aren't forcing them to sit there and consider a variety of different delivery mechanisms that they may not understand well. The user preferences are considered, again, looking at where I want to pick it up, what formats I might want to be interested in, resulting in a much more customized experience. And there's much more efficiency internally in processing, which leads to faster delivery for the patron. So that's my first use case. The second that I think is important to our conceptual model is the recognition that unlike in current systems where resources and people really sort of live in the library silo in a little box, that the conceptual model for Intota understands that data about resources and people needs to be connected into the larger web of information to enrich and extend what the library knows. So we need to break down that library silo and get connected to the other kinds of information resources that are available on the web. So to illustrate this point, let's consider one of the topics that we hear about frequently, personalization of library services. I had an opportunity to attend a conference at the beginning of February, and there were a number of people who were speaking about the future of libraries is really one in which there will be a much higher degree of personalization of services, customization of services. And the conceptual model gives us the flexibility to connect to people in the library context to external sources of data about those people, enhancing the level of service that we provide. So in this example, here's an example of an ORCID record for Brian Dykstra. And if we look at the details that are included about Brian here, we see a standard identifier that links to the ORCID data. I see keywords about the user. So what are their research interests? He's interested in botany and ethnobiology, ethnoecology, and so on. We can see education information. He's gone to school at Humboldt State University and, with apologies to Jeff, Michigan State University, and then employment and work. So lots of rich information about this particular user. So Intota can use that ID to link out to information in the broader web context about our users. And instead of having a skinny little patron record like we do in our traditional ILS systems where we know a name and an address and an email and a phone number, just enough to facilitate the circulation transaction, what we can do is enrich that patron record, elevate it in the process, elevate it in the model, and we can gather lots more information. So what do we know about Brian as a result? And I mentioned some of those things on the previous screen. And looking at where he has graduated from, where he's employed, what his interests are. How can Intota use that information to support Brian more effectively? One thing that we can do is that if he's borrowing from Humboldt or Michigan State and they happen to use Intota, we can validate him as an alumni borrower at those institutions. We can deliver recommendations in his areas of interest because we know a little bit more about what his specialization is, where he's spending his time researching, and we can link him into other research and publication communities more effectively. So we can provide some more services to Brian. At the same time, Intota can support some other needs. And I know a lot of times we hear about institutions expecting the library to demonstrate value. How are you supporting grants, or how are you supporting research outcomes or student outcomes? In this particular case, having some additional information about Brian helps us to understand library research and publication activities by extending the research presence of the institution through alumni and helping to demonstrate the persistence of research and supportive grants. So that's just one example of how Intota can pull in that data and then use it to help assess the effectiveness of the library support to researchers, not just those that are there today, but researchers that have moved on and that research chain is following them. So as those two scenarios illustrate, we end up in a fundamentally different place, a much more transformative place when we view libraries through the lens of resources and people rather than processes. I encourage you to think through some of your current workflows from the perspective of the conceptual model. One of the great things about this is that it's completely extensible and can accommodate changing as well as emerging relationships. So as Jeff talked about in his discussion, a library as publisher is something that so many institutions are focused on. Library as publisher is just relationships mapped onto resources and people and organizations. And so it becomes very easy to extend this model to accommodate new kinds of workflows. So before I wrap things up, I'd like to extend an invitation to all of you to join the conversation. Hopefully this overview has given you some food for thought. We're certainly eager for your thoughts and feedback on this approach to building a next generation system and for your ideas about how the community can leverage this model more generally to power solutions that better match your current and future needs. I've included my email here. And I welcome input and questions following this session. And I also should recognize the development partners with which we're working: Ball State University, Johnson County Community College, Marist College, and SUNY Geneseo. At this point, I know that there are a couple of questions that have come across. I'm going to actually have my colleague, Rob Alley, turn things over to Rob and have him moderate a Q&A period. If there are other questions, please feel free to go ahead and type those into the Q&A chat window.
Thanks, Kathryn, and thanks, Jeff. There have been a few, so I will sort through some of these for us all. Jeff's been responding to some that are GVSU related while you were speaking there, Kathryn. So he's covered a lot of them, but a few I think might be helpful for the group. So Jeff, you had some early questions about your research consultants. How do students qualify? And there were some questions around that area. Do you have a comment or two to make?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. Research consultants are just student workers that work for the library a lot of them are former student workers. It's a souped up process. They go through a pretty rigorous interview process, the application process. They need recommendations from faculty members. I don't have the specifics, but anyone that wants to reach out to me, I'd be happy to put them in touch with the person that runs that process. But I will say a lot of them are students that have self-identified as wanting to go on and get a degree in library science. So they're just super library students is what they are.
Great. That helps. I'm sure others had the same question. And one just, Jeff, for you came in as well. How do you train peer mentors in the knowledge market?
Well, that's the similar, those are the student workers that I was just talking about, and we actually based it off of the peer mentors from the Writing Center. So now the Writing Center, the library, and the Speech Center all have these student workers that are trained. For our research consultants, they go through monthly training with our liaison librarians on the reference interview, on specific resources, on how, some of the stuff we all learn in library school. They start to teach them that type of things to help students help other students.
Great. And then Kathryn, I hope I characterized this one correctly. There was a question about, is the Intota system using algorithms rather than the individual handling of requests? So if I captured that, or maybe Kathryn, you have some expanded thoughts you can share.
Yep, I actually took a quick look at the question there. So the question is really about how does the sort of business logic work that facilitates the appropriate channeling of requests? And then I think a little bit deeper question is, how do you sort of prevent somebody from abusing that situation and placing hundreds of requests for graphic novels or mysteries or things that are outside the library's core collecting areas? So a couple of pieces to the answer to that. There is a set of library-defined rules that get applied. So you have the opportunity at your institution to determine at what point something is going to flag up for somebody's review. And that could be every item if you wanted to flag every item. It could be something based on different characteristics of the resource. So if it's a particular kind of resource, or if it costs more than X number of dollars, or if it's outside of one of your core collecting areas, things like that can trigger an alert that would require someone to sort of physically intervene. But the notion is to really get to a point where you're handling exception processing rather than every single one of the routine requests. To prevent somebody from sort of gaming the system and building a stealth graphic novel collection, you could also allow or limit the number of requests that a user could place in a particular period of time without explicit approval. So they might get through with one graphic novel, but that the third or fourth one that comes in, you might start to flag that up for somebody to review. And again, you could handle that to a degree with specifying your collecting domains and determining what gets sent for attention outside of that. So the rules there are pretty complex and pretty multidimensional, but we think it gives the library the control of the process and how much work they want to automate and how much they want to process directly.
Great, thank you. One more has come in. Do you still have to create or download metadata for titles purchased from Amazon?
We can capture some of that information based on the initial request and enhance that with data from a variety of different sources. So you still need, obviously, something that represents that resource in your collection, both for processing reasons and then obviously for discovery reasons. And it's up to the library in terms of how rich that information needs to be for each step of that process. Probably for the initial internal activities before you get to discovery, a fairly brief record, rudimentary record is sufficient, and then you can decide how to enhance that record or whether to allow Intota to enhance the record as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Jeff, quickly, somebody asked, do you still have a traditional reference or research desk?
We do not. We haven't had a reference desk in 5 or 6 years. We did some studies at the time and determined that the actual research consultation questions had diminished during the hours that our librarians are available. And we had librarians answering questions like, which way to the bathroom, can I borrow a pencil? We do still have liaison subject specialists available to handle consultations, but our frontline staff are trained to recognize, hey, this might actually be a more in-depth question about research itself. Would you like to set up an appointment with one of our reference librarians?
Great. The questions have slowed. We have about 4 minutes left in the program. So if folks would like to ask, please use the Q&A panel. You're welcome to submit that way to us. Yeah, I think, Kathryn, I know you have access as well. If you're seeing anything there that I skipped over, let's make sure we respond to those. And also would like to let the audience know that we are able to answer questions after the fact. So if you submit questions through Q&A, we haven't gotten to them, we will be able to respond following the program. And you do have Jeff and Kathryn's emails directly, too, if you have specific questions for them.
I don't
Jeff, did you
think
see the
I've
comment?
seen
Love your furniture choices.
Real quick story, I know we're towards the end. We actually did, as a library council, spend 2 full days in a room with hundreds of chairs, sitting on them and voting on them, and it was a lot of fun.
Kathryn, you were making a comment, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say I hadn't seen any additional questions. There's a question from Sean, and I saw it pass by earlier, but I don't know where it went. So I did see it. The question is about sort of isn't the implementation of something as complex as that routing. How steep is that implementation curve, I believe was the question. And that's one of the things that, it's a balance. One of the things that we're working with our partners to consider is how does that work? What are some of the best practices in terms of approaching that? One of the things that we're working with our implementation and support team, training teams on is how to help libraries make appropriate decisions about that, because it obviously, with as dynamic as it needs to be to meet your local requirements and your local preferences, it certainly can be a place where you're going to want to spend some time thinking about how to structure that, how to arrange that, and so that's certainly part of what we would handle as part of the professional services within Intota implementation.
Great. Jeff, does GVSU utilize a UX library?
We do have a user experience position at Grand Valley. It's a relatively new position for us, and she's done an amazing job.
Great. Okay, I don't see new ones. Thank you both for answering those questions. I know you're available afterwards and happy to speak with folks who have interest and questions. I'm going to pass it back to Laura with choice now, and we'll wrap up the program for today.
Great. Thank you, Rob. I'd like to give all of our presenters a virtual round of applause for spending some time with us today and sharing some great information. We really do appreciate your insights and your time. Just a reminder, we have recorded today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from ACRL and Choice that will include instructions on accessing the archived version. Thanks again to all of our presenters and our participants for joining us. I hope you all enjoyed this session. Please enjoy the rest of your day.